behind the glamour of Nashville lies a darker truth, where fame and whiskey walked hand in hand. In this video, Country Reverse uncovers 11 country music legends who were drunk all the time. From George Jones riding his lawnmower to buy booze, to Hank Williams Sr. drinking himself into legend, these stars lived fast, sang hard, and paid the ultimate price. This is the untold story of how alcohol shaped and shattered country music's wildest icon. 1. George Jones, the king who couldn't stay sober. There was no one like George Jones. A voice that could break your heart in 3 syllables, a stage presence that defined country music's soul. And yet, behind that golden voice was a man trapped in his own darkness. Jones didn't just drink, he drowned himself in it. The same man who sang "He Stopped Loving Her Today" often couldn't remember the night before. His addiction was legendary, and Nashville both adored and pitied him. His struggle with alcohol began early, rooted in a childhood filled with violence and chaos. Fame only poured gasoline on that fire. By the late 1960s, Jones had become so unreliable that fans gave him a cruel nickname, No Show Jones. He would vanish for entire tours, leaving bandmates stranded and promoters furious. Tammy Wynette, his wife and duet partner, tried to save him, hiding his car keys to stop him from going out for more whiskey. But Jones, in one of the most infamous acts in country history, rode a lawnmower 8 miles to a liquor store. That single story became the perfect symbol of his madness and his myth. As the years passed, his voice only grew more powerful, but so did the bottle's grip. He missed shows, lost fortunes, and alienated almost everyone who loved him. Nashville whispered about him as both a genius and a ghost. A man who could move an audience to tears at 8 p.m. and be blackout drunk by 10. Even his friend Johnny Cash once said, "There's never been anyone like George, and there never will be again." In his later years, Jones found moments of clarity and redemption. He finally sobered up, rediscovered faith, and reclaimed his legend before passing in 2013. But his story remains a brutal reminder that behind country music's greatest voice stood a man haunted by his demons. A king ruled by the bottle. 2. Hank Williams Sr., the original outlaw destroyed by the bottle. Before the term outlaw country ever existed, there was Hank Williams Sr., a man whose pain, poetry, and whiskey-soaked voice built the foundation of country music itself. His songs were heartbreak wrapped in melody, and his life was a slow-motion tragedy that Nashville could never turn away from. Hank didn't just sing about sorrow, he lived it until it consumed him. Born in the Deep South during the Great Depression, Hank's youth was marked by poverty, illness, and loneliness. The bottle became both his medicine and his curse. By his 20s, fame had struck fast and hard. Your Cheating Heart, I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry, Cold, Cold Heart, each hit deeper than the last. But success couldn't silence the physical pain from his lifelong spinal injury, nor the emotional void that fame exposed. He began mixing whiskey with morphine, a deadly combination that turned the brightest star in Nashville into its most fragile soul. On stage, Hank could make a crowd of thousands weep with a single note. Offstage, he was often too drunk to stand. Promoters dreaded his name on the lineup. His bandmates told stories of him passing out backstage, of shows canceled minutes before curtain, of desperate nights where he'd trade his guitar for another bottle. To the world, he was the voice of heartache. To those closest to him, he was heartbreak itself. In 1953, on New Year's Day, Hank Williams Sr. was found lifeless in the back seat of his Cadillac. He was only 29 years old. A bottle of beer lay beside him, one last silent witness to the man who gave everything to his music and lost everything to his demons. Even today, every country singer who steps on stage owes something to Hank. His legacy is the soul of country music, raw, broken, and beautiful. But it came at the highest cost, a legend who sang the truth until it killed him. 3. Waylon Jennings, the outlaw who lived fast, loud, and drunk. If country music ever had a true rebel, it was Waylon Jennings, the man who flipped off Nashville's rules, tore down the establishment, and built the outlaw movement from pure defiance. He wasn't just wild, he was chaos with a guitar. Whiskey was his constant companion, as familiar as his Telecaster and his gravel-drenched drawl. For Waylon, sobriety was the exception, not the rule. In the early years, Waylon played bass for Buddy Holly and was supposed to be on the plane that crashed in 1959. When Holly gave his seat to another bandmate, Waylon joked, "I hope your old plane crashes." It did, and that guilt haunted him for the rest of his life. From that point on, he carried his demons through every dive bar and recording studio in America, drowning them in bourbon and later in cocaine. By the 1970s, Waylon had declared war on the Nashville system. He refused to wear rhinestones, rejected the label's control, and made music that sounded like rebellion itself. But the success of Honky Tonk Heroes and Dreaming My Dreams came with a price. He was drinking heavily every day, often washing down cocaine with Jack Daniels just to stay on stage. Friends described his tours as rolling chaos, hotel room fights, broken bottles, and the kind of nights legends are built on. Yet through the haze, his artistry burned bright. Songs like Are You Sure Hank Done It This Way and Luckenbach, Texas became anthems for every misfit who didn't fit Nashville's mold. Behind that swagger, though, was a man on the edge. His weight dropped, his marriage to Jessie Coulter was strained, and his health began to collapse. Waylon later admitted he'd spent over $2,500 a day on cocaine and didn't even realize how close he was to death. In the 1980s, after years of self-destruction, he finally sobered up for his son's shooter. The outlaw had survived the storm, but the whiskey-soaked legend remained. Waylon Jennings embodied the brutal beauty of country's wild side, a man who lived loud, loved hard, and nearly drank himself into eternity. 4. Willie Nelson, the gentle rebel with a whiskey soul. Few names in country music carry the same weight as Willie Nelson, the red-headed stranger whose gentle voice and outlaw heart defined an era. To most fans, he's the peaceful rebel, the smiling troubadour with a guitar named Trigger. But behind the calm grin and slow Texas drawl was a man who lived through the haze of whiskey, weed, and heartbreak, teetering between enlightenment and self-destruction. In the 1960s, Willie was a struggling songwriter in Nashville, constantly rejected for his unpolished voice and unconventional look. He found solace where many broken dreamers did, at the bottom of a glass. Late nights at Tootsie's Orchid Lounge became therapy sessions filled with bourbon, smoke, and pain. The industry's pressure to conform nearly broke him, and alcohol became both his escape and his rebellion. By the 1970s, when he finally broke free from Nashville's control and returned to Texas, the drinking only deepened, now mixed with the chaos of success. Albums like Red-Headed Stranger and Shotgun Willie turned him into an icon, but fame came with endless parties, all-night jams, and more whiskey than any man could handle. Willie drank not to forget, but to feel everything, the joy, the sorrow, the loneliness of the road. His bandmates often said he could outdrink anyone, then step on stage and deliver a performance that sounded like pure poetry. The wild nights caught up eventually. IRS raids, broken marriages, and years of physical exhaustion forced him to slow down. Willie once admitted that the only thing that ever replaced whiskey was weed, and that switch may have saved his life. Unlike so many of his peers, he managed to survive his demons long enough to outlive them. Today, Willie Nelson stands as the rare outlaw who beat the bottle and kept the music alive. His songs still carry that old ache, the sound of a man who's seen too much, lost too much, and somehow found peace in the wreckage. He wasn't destroyed by whiskey. 5. Hank Williams Jr., the son who tried to outdrink his father's ghost. Growing up as the son of Hank Williams Sr. is like living in the shadow of a ghost, one carved from whiskey, heartbreak, and tragedy. For Hank Williams Jr., that ghost never left his side. He inherited his father's voice, his stage presence, and unfortunately, his weakness for the bottle. But instead of letting it destroy him quietly, Hank Jr. turned it into a storm, loud, defiant, and unforgettable. From a young age, Hank Jr. was forced to step into his father's boots, performing his dad's songs for audiences who didn't see him, only the legend's son. That pressure pushed him straight toward rebellion. By his 20s, he was drinking heavily, living wild on the road, and clashing with the very industry that idolized his father. Whiskey became his shield, against grief, against expectation, against the unbearable weight of being Hank's boy. Then came 1975, the year that changed everything. While climbing a Montana mountain, Hank Jr. fell nearly 500 feet. His skull was shattered, his face destroyed. He wasn't expected to live. When he finally did, he was unrecognizable, physically and emotionally. Recovery was brutal, and the bottle became his anesthetic once again. But out of that wreckage came Bocephus, a new identity, half outlaw, half survivor. In the 1980s, with albums like Whiskey Bent and Hellbound and Family Tradition, Hank Jr. roared back to the top. He turned his pain into power, his drinking into an image, part myth, part madness. Fans saw him as the last great outlaw, a man who didn't just sing about whiskey, but lived it. His concerts were part celebration, part confession. He'd stumble, joke, rage, then pour his heart into a song like A Country Boy Can Survive. Through all the chaos, Hank Jr. managed to outlive the curse that took his father. But he never fully escaped it. The whiskey never left. It just changed form, from torment to trademark. In a way, Hank Jr. didn't just survive the bottle. He made it part of his legend. 6. Johnny Paycheck, the hardest drinking rebel in Nashville. If there was ever a man who embodied the phrase self-destruction with style, it was Johnny Paycheck. With his gravel voice, outlaw spirit, and unpredictable temper, he lived every line of his biggest hit, "Take this job and shove it." But behind that defiant anthem lay a man consumed by the same thing that fueled his legend: whiskey. Johnny Paycheck didn't just drink, he declared war on sobriety. Born Donald Lytle in Ohio, he clawed his way out of obscurity with raw talent and reckless energy. By the time he joined George Jones's band as a backup singer, Paycheck already had a reputation: brilliant when sober, dangerous when drunk. He was fired more times than anyone could count, but his voice was too powerful to ignore. When his solo career took off in the 1970s, he finally became a star. But success and sobriety were never meant to coexist in his world. His days were a blur of whiskey bottles, cocaine, and endless fights. Barroom brawls were as common as encores. Friends said he could charm a crowd and start a riot within the same hour. He was arrested multiple times for assault, tax evasion, and even shooting a man in the head during a drunken argument, a moment that sent him to prison in 1989. When asked about it later, Paycheck simply said, "Whiskey and anger, they don't mix well." In prison, stripped of fame and liquor, he finally faced his demons. He claimed to have found God, sobered up, and slowly clawed his way back to the stage. When he emerged, the swagger was still there, but the chaos had dulled. He performed until his health collapsed, still singing songs about rebellion and regret. Johnny Paycheck's story isn't just another cautionary tale. It's the essence of the outlaw myth. He lived and bled for every note, leaving behind a legacy drenched in whiskey and defiance. He didn't just take a job and shove it. He shoved the entire Nashville system. 7. Keith Whitley, the angel voice drowned in whiskey. Few country singers ever sounded as pure or as heartbreaking as Keith Whitley. His voice carried the weight of an old soul trapped in a young man's body, smooth as Tennessee honey and heavy with sadness. But behind that angelic tone was a man who couldn't escape the pull of the bottle. Keith didn't drink to party. He drank to survive the pain that genius often brings. Born in Kentucky's Appalachian Hills, Whitley grew up singing bluegrass before Nashville discovered him. He had everything: talent, looks, charisma, and a voice that could stop time. Songs like "Don't Close Your Eyes" and "When You Say Nothing at All" made him one of the brightest rising stars of the 1980s. But what few fans knew was that behind the studio glass, Keith was fighting a war with himself, and losing. Alcohol had been part of his life since his teens, when he'd down bottles on tour just to steady his nerves. Fame only magnified it. Those who knew him described two Keiths: the charming, funny artist who loved his fans, and the quiet, broken man who couldn't face his own reflection without whiskey in his hand. Even his wife, country star Lori Morgan, tried everything to help him, hiding bottles and begging him to go to rehab. But Keith would always smile and say, "Honey, I've got it under control." He didn't. On May 9th, 1989, Keith Whitley was found dead in his home. His blood alcohol level was .47, nearly 5 times the legal limit. He was only 33 years old. The news shattered Nashville. Here was a man on the brink of superstardom, gone before he ever reached it. His death wasn't just another statistic, it was a heartbreak the entire genre felt. Keith Whitley's legacy lives on in every soulful ballad, and every singer who learned that emotion means nothing without honesty. But it's impossible to separate the beauty of his music from the tragedy of his addiction. He sang like an angel, and drank like a man desperate to escape heaven's silence. 8. Tammy Wynette, the first lady who stood by her demons. They called her the first lady of country music, but behind the dazzling gowns and the perfect hair, Tammy Wynette lived a life scarred by pain, pills, and the quiet torment of addiction. While most knew her for Stand By Your Man, few understood that the man she had to stand by the hardest was herself. And though the public saw elegance, those closest to her saw a woman slowly unraveling under the weight of fame, heartbreak, and the bottle. Born Virginia Wynette Pugh in Mississippi, she grew up poor and driven, determined to escape the cotton fields for a better life. Her voice, filled with longing and raw emotion, carried her straight to Nashville's spotlight in the 1960s. But success didn't bring peace. Behind closed doors, Tammy's life became a storm of failed marriages, illness, and dependency on painkillers and alcohol. The pressure to remain perfect, the smiling, loyal country queen, pushed her into darker corners. Her marriage to George Jones became both a country fairy tale and a public tragedy. They were country's royal couple until whiskey and rage tore them apart. Tammy tried to save him, hiding the car keys, praying for sobriety. But soon she was fighting her own battle, numbing her loneliness with the same bottle that destroyed him. When Jones was gone, Tammy's demons stayed. Pills, whiskey, hospital visits, a slow, invisible collapse behind the curtain of fame. Still on stage, she was unstoppable. Her heartbreak became her art. Songs like DIVORCE and Till I Can Make It on My Own weren't performances. They were confessions. Every lyric carried the echo of her pain. And though the tabloids feasted on her troubles, fans loved her more for her honesty. When Tammy Wynette died in 1998, her passing felt like the end of an era. The final note of a song too beautiful to last. She stood by her music, her lovers, and her pain until the very end. Tammy didn't just sing about heartbreak. She lived it, whiskey glass in hand, until the curtain fell. 9. George Strait, the quiet cowboy who fought his own shadows. To the world, George Strait is the embodiment of clean-cut country perfection. The king of country, the man who never missed a note, never broke a rule, never stumbled. But even kings carry secrets. In his early years, behind that calm Texan smile and crisp cowboy hat, Strait fought a quiet battle with grief, loneliness, and the bottle. He wasn't an outlaw by image, but in his private world, he drank like one. Strait's rise to fame in the early 1980s was meteoric. While others embraced the wild outlaw era, George revived traditional country, the smooth steel guitars, the twang, the sincerity. But the relentless pace of touring, recording, and performing took a toll. Night after night, in small-town bars and stadiums alike, he turned to whiskey to stay steady, to silence the ache that fame couldn't fix. Friends said he could outdrink almost anyone, but never seemed drunk. He was the professional who knew how to suffer in silence. Then tragedy struck. In 1986, his 13-year-old daughter, Jennifer, was killed in a car accident. It was the wound that would never heal. Strait withdrew from the media completely. No interviews, no press, no public mourning. But those who knew him said that the only time he allowed himself to feel was on stage, or with a glass in his hand. Whiskey became a quiet companion, a way to numb what words could never express. Through the years, Strait learned to bury his pain under discipline. He poured it all into music. Baby Blue, You'll Be There, The Chair. The bottle that once dulled his emotions became the symbol of the emotions he could no longer show. He never spiraled like the outlaws before him, but the sadness in his eyes told its own story. Today, George Strait stands as one of the few legends who survived Nashville with dignity intact, but not untouched. Behind his clean reputation lies the truth of a man who fought his demons quietly, one drink at a time. He may have sung about Amarillo by morning, but he knew what it felt like to wake up with whiskey by his side. 10. Merle Haggard, the fugitive who found freedom in the bottle. If country music ever had a poet outlaw, it was Merle Haggard, the man who turned prison time, heartbreak, and whiskey into gold records. His voice carried the raw ache of the working man, the defiance of a drifter, and the sorrow of a sinner who knew redemption was always one drink away. To his fans, Merle was the rebel who survived it all. But to those who knew him, he was a man forever chased by ghosts, and too often he found them at the bottom of a bottle. Born poor in Depression-era California, Haggard grew up hard and angry. By the time he was a teenager, he was already in trouble. Petty theft, running from home, and eventually serving time in San Quentin prison, where he saw Johnny Cash perform. That show changed his life, But it didn't erase his demons. When fame came in the 1960s with hits like Mama Tried, The Bottle Let Me Down, and Sing Me Back Home, Merle was finally living his dream, but whiskey was living in him. He drank to write, he drank to perform, and he drank to forget. On tour, he'd polish off bottles of gin or bourbon before going on stage, his voice somehow steady even when his hands weren't. Friends said he'd wake up shaking, pour himself a drink, and keep going. He'd fight, curse, love, and sing, all with the same intensity. The Bottle Let Me Down wasn't just a song title, it was a confession. Haggard's life was a cycle of redemption and relapse. He'd swear off alcohol, then dive back in when the loneliness of the road caught up. His relationships crumbled, his health deteriorated, but his music never lost its soul. Even in his later years, when his voice grew raspy and his hands trembled, fans could still feel that old pain. Honest, human, eternal. When Merle Haggard died in 2016, on his 79th birthday, Nashville didn't just lose a legend. It lost a man who lived every lyric he ever wrote. He was the fugitive who never stopped running, the outlaw who found his freedom and his prison in the same bottle. 11. Tanya Tucker, the rebel queen who drank through the storm. In a world ruled by cowboys, Tanya Tucker stood out, fierce, fearless, and unapologetically wild. She burst onto the scene at just 13 with Delta Dawn, a child prodigy with a woman's voice and the spirit of a renegade. But fame came too fast, and the whiskey came even faster. Tanya grew up in the spotlight, and the bottle became both her comfort and her curse. By the time she was 20, Tanya had already lived a lifetime's worth of chaos. Her rise through Nashville's male-dominated world came with judgment, temptation, and loneliness. The industry adored her talent, but criticized her every move. So she rebelled. She drank, she smoked, she partied with rock stars and outlaws, earning a reputation that both thrilled and terrified Nashville. Her relationships with men like Glenn Campbell and Merle Haggard made headlines. But behind the scenes, it was the whiskey that had her heart. On stage, Tanya was electric. Off stage, she was a storm. Nights would end in bar fights or blackout memories. Mornings would begin with regrets and another drink. Friends recall her pouring Jack Daniels into coffee cups before noon, laughing it off as part of the outlaw life. She didn't hide her drinking. She wore it like armor. For Tanya, whiskey wasn't weakness. It was rebellion, a statement that she'd play by her own rules or not at all. But years of excess took their toll. Her voice, once pure fire, began to crack. Her confidence wavered. By the 1990s, tabloids called her washed up, another fallen star. Yet, like every true outlaw, Tanya didn't stay down. She sobered up, returned to music, and slowly rebuilt her legacy. Her comeback album, While I'm Livin', in 2019, proved that the Rebel Queen still had her crown. Tanya Tucker's story is not one of shame, but survival. She faced her demons, drank with them, and somehow came out singing louder than ever. She wasn't just drunk on whiskey, she was drunk on life, pain, and defiance. And that's what made her unforgettable.